Will Kalkhoff is a professor of sociology at Kent State University. He's an executive director of the Electrophysiological Neuroscience Laboratory of Kent and an executive committee member of the Brain Health Research Institute. His research interests include neurosociology and social psychology. His current projects focus on neurodynamics of social cohesion, group processes, and the neurosociology of human interaction, digital and virtual environments. All right. Thank you, Will, for being with me today. I wanted to start off by asking you what initially led you to study sociology?
Yeah, that was kind of an accident. Times were a little different when I was getting my degree. So nowadays it seems like you have a lot more advising as you go along, and a lot of that is automated, which I think is good. But back then, I don't even really recall that I had an advisor or there was any kind of advising staff. So I was just kind of taking classes, and I was getting close to graduating. So this was 1994. So in 1993, I started getting worried about what I was going to do. And so I went to the sociology main office, and they said, well, you should really go talk to Javier Trevino. He's your advisor. And I didn't even really know that. And so we kind of took a look at, what I had been taking, what I had been doing. And he said, you probably should major in sociology. So you seem to have taken a lot of courses in sociology. So it was kind of like Bem's self-perception theory. So I looked at the courses I had been taking, and it's like, wow, you've taken an awful lot of courses in sociology. You really seem to like that. And I did. It was a different time. People just weren't thinking about things in the same way. And I said, well, what should I do with that if I major in that? He said, well, you could go to graduate school. I said, okay. And I said, so where should I go? And he gave me a list of 4 or 5 schools. And I applied to them, and I just went to the one that was closest to home. Really not knowing what to expect or what I was doing, but I think then, when I got to graduate school is where the passion developed. So yeah, I kind of fell into it. It was really an accident how it all sort of happened. But I was interested in so many different things in college. It was really hard for me to choose. So what helped me choose was just looking at where I had taken most of my courses, and that just turned out to be sociology.
And then you went to the graduate program at Kent State, is that right?
University of Iowa.
Okay, University of Iowa. Where was home for you?
It's a little town called Cedarburg. It's
okay.
About 20 minutes north of Milwaukee.
All right.
So,
what were your first experiences related to experiments?
Yeah, it was interesting. When I got to graduate school, probably by no big surprise, I didn't have funding.
Yeah.
I was one of the only unfunded students.
Oh,
and
no.
And so when I got my acceptance letter, I didn't think anything of that. Who cares? I didn't really know what that was, because at the time where I was going to college, Marquette University, I think they might have had a master's program, but there wasn't this, big graduate student culture. And so I really didn't know what graduate school was all about. To me, it just felt like a continuation of college.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't working with anyone my first semester. That actually became a huge source of anxiety not too long after I started, once I realized that I was one of the only people that wasn't assigned to anyone. So this older graduate student, more advanced graduate student, kind of took me under his wing. And he was doing his dissertation research at the time. And so he said, well, why don't you come run experiments with me in the lab? And so I did that. And that was one of the many very positive experiences. I would say most of my experiences off the bat in graduate school were either horrifying and terrible or just amazing and incredible. So it was such a incredible time. But his name was Jeff Erger, and he was such a great graduate student mentor to me. He really got me interested in experiments. So, I credit him with that.
It seemed like you just kind of bumped into it. Like it was something
that
okay.
Yeah, I think that was always sort of my biggest problem. And people along the way in graduate school pointed this out to me several times. I had a really hard time figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, with what interested me in sociology. Is just really kind of a kid in a candy shop, as they say. I just loved everything.
Hmm.
You know, I always found something to love about whatever I was studying, whatever I was investigating, whatever I was doing. It's like, I love this and I love this and I love this. It was just too hard to decide. And
Just curious, did you go straight from high school into college, or was there a break?
yeah, I went direct, but it was the same kind of thing. I just, you know, I've always had this desire to stay kind of close to home.
Me too.
And what I know and what I love. And so I went to Ripon College, which that's the first college I went to. I ended up coming home and going to Marquette, but it was really what's closest, you know, that I got into. And so
Then you got into experiments. Then, if I'm not mistaken, your advisor was Lisa Troyer.
yeah,
How did that come about? She was just at the university where you were at?
Lisa was what I needed. I think I frustrated a lot of people when I first started at Iowa because I think, you know, I really had passion for coursework and discussion and debate and research, but I had a really hard time sort of pinning things down and saying, this is what I want to do, this is what I love. And so I worked with a number of people, and I would learn something from them, and then I'd work. So I think I actually benefited from an experience that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just getting a lot of different perspectives on sociology and how to do sociology. But Lisa was really just, this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to do it. So she provided a structure, I think, that I needed. Just an absolutely amazing mentor. And she was very good at that. She was very good at sort of figuring out what you needed to stay on track, to make the best of your strengths and sort of manage your weaknesses. So it was I'm really glad she ended up there.
And then by that time, were you committed to experiments as a methodology?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, probably part of the reason why I got into experiments is because so many people were doing them. You know, so
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you were at Iowa in the 90s, that's what everybody was doing in social psych. So when I got there, it was Barry Markovsky, Mike LaVaglia, Ed Lawler had just left, Lisa Troyer. So, I mean, most of the people then Don Robinson came. So, you know, most of the people that were there were experimentalist types. And a lot of the grad students were doing experiments, and the lab was, you know, very well known. And so it was just kind of something you did. But I think it also fit my personality, that method.
Wow. All right. Yeah, you just kind of bumped into it and went with it.
Yeah, cool. It's kind of been the story of my life.
Well, then, how did you get interested in expectation states and identity theory research? I guess it was just around at Iowa.
You know, it's more of the same. Yeah, I mean, everybody was doing expectation states at the time. You know, Barry was doing expectation states, also network exchange theory and some other things. A lot of the grad students were working on expectation states. And for me, it wasn't just all conformity. It wasn't like, well, everybody else is doing it, so I'm going to do it. I mean, that was certainly a part of it, but it was a really vibrant intellectual community. I mean, it was exciting. It was a really exciting time to work in expectation states because you'd pick up, you know, the latest copy of SBQ or the latest copy of ASR or AJS. That stuff was getting published routinely in the top journals. And for me, having never been exposed to any of this formal theorizing or mathematical sociology, I was just blown away that this even existed. I just found it completely fascinating. But it was just a really exciting time. So yeah, expectation states was synonymous with University of Iowa in the 1990s.
Wow, I didn't know all that. Well, okay, so since virtually no one outside of sociology knows about expectation states research, can you explain a little bit about what status organizing processes are?
Yeah, I mean, I think the person who's best at talking about expectation states is Cecilia Ridgway. So when you talk about expectation states theory, I think it's very easy to get caught up in the formal language, in the mathematical formulation of the theory. All of that is important and has really done its part to advance the theory. But it's also talking about something that most sociologists know about, and that's just in general what it is to be high status. So, high status people are those that tend to be more influential. We tend to go along with them. We tend to seek their opinions about things. We tend to hold them in high regard. They tend to amass resources in part because of their status. So, I mean, it's really not that much different than the way you and I think about what, Merriam-Webster. Probably the best way to talk about status is through an example. Like when he first came to Iowa, when I first met him in the 90s, he came and gave a theory workshop. And he was and is a really big name in expectation states. And so me as a new graduate student, I heard that Murray was coming to town. It was like the king is coming to town. And it's just that feeling of being in awe of someone is just so smart and so worthy of your respect and admiration. That's what status is all about. And I think what the expectation states people tried to do was put that into a formal framework, a testable framework, a mathematical framework that will allow us to take sort of a simple idea that most of us have, a sense of, whether we're just sociologists or lay people, and do something really neat with that in terms of being able to make very precise predictions about how status works, how status characteristics combine with other status characteristics, and how status is different from raw power, how status combines with power. So it was an attempt to mathematize, to formalize a very simple, intuitive idea, and it was really just absolutely ingenious the way the whole theory unfolded. So I became fascinated with that. It's like, how do you're taking this idea and you're putting it into this framework that's just remarkable in terms of its ability to explain and predict.
Mm-hmm. So you described like in the 90s, it's like very collaborative. People are really interested in these ideas. What has happened, do you think, since the 90s? Has it stagnated? Has it regressed? What would you say has been the state?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of sitting here observing things, I don't know when it happened or how it happened. There seems to be less interest in that kind of formal theorizing in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, back in the 90s, it was, formal theories of power, formal theories of status, formal theories of identity. And that was kind of all the rage back then. People were very excited about that. And I just sort of, I don't think the theory has died. I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I just think the interest in sort of the nuts and bolts of status and formal aspects of it, mathematical thinking along those lines, that just seems to be something that's just not as pursued in sociology now as it was. So it's not just expectation states. I think it's just a more general transformation of the field away from that kind of thinking and more towards, I saw the interview that you did with John Turner, and I'm pretty much inclined to agree with him and his take on how sociology has evolved. But yeah, it's just, I can't really tell you why, but it's obviously become much more a politically charged
field. Like he describes it, it kind of goes up and down. I mean, there's periods where theory construction's really popular, and then it wanes, and then it comes back.
And I haven't seen the up and down. I've just kind of seen it up here, and then now it's kind of down here. So maybe it'll come back.
Experimental sociology, to me and to you, it sounds like it's really fascinating, and there's a lot of things you wouldn't expect. Why do you think experimental sociology has not received much attention outside of sociology?
Can you say that again? Why it hasn't what?
Why hasn't the work that you guys are doing, like from Iowa, like, all these people who are doing experimental research, doesn't really seem to, in the public sphere, nobody seems to know about it.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll tell you, the first time I got really concerned about that was President Obama had a program called My Brother's Keeper.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
I think if I recall, the point of this program was to sort of identify the challenges of Black inner city youth, and I think it might have been males in particular. And so Obama, convened this panel of experts to try to understand this problem, and there wasn't a single sociologist involved in this project.
Wow.
And that was just terrifying to me. But it gets at the point you're making, is that it's not just expectation states or network exchange theory. It's sociology in general. Why aren't people talking to us more?
Mm-hmm.
And in part, maybe that has something to do with us. Maybe we're just not very good salespeople.
Right.
It seems like we tend to talk mostly to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something I'm trying to do right now, is overcome some of that. But I also think that I can't really speak to this with a high degree of confidence, but we don't seem to be as on board with the scientific method as other disciplines, and maybe that generates some degree of distrust. So, the last couple of meeting themes, one way or another, seem to be critical of science or the scientific method. And I'm not sure that's the way you get a seat at the table.
Right.
So some of it, I think, is just us not doing a good enough job of getting out there and selling our work, showing people what we're doing and how it can be applied, beyond the simple. We mentioned a few policy implications in the discussion section of the article.
Yeah.
But, that's not to say nobody's doing that, but I just think we could be better at doing that sort of thing. And I really don't think treating science as just one epistemology among many is doing us any favors.
All right, switching topics. Can you explain how you got interested in vocal accommodation theory?
Yeah, that was another example of falling into something. That's what Stan Gregory was working on when I got here. So I didn't really know about it, and he was just sort of this crazy old guy doing this weird research on the voice, and nobody really understood it. Nobody really understood how it worked. It's like he would record your voice, he would put it through this machine, and then this information would come out on the other side, and supposedly that said something about your status or your power and how the course of the interaction was going. And of course, that totally fascinated me. So, but it was complicated because he's throwing around phrases like fast Fourier transform, but anytime I've encountered anything like that, that was, rather than be deterred by it, it's like I want to understand what he's talking about and what he's doing, and if that's true that these things are imprinted in our voices, I want to know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just, and he's, I think, just light years beyond. It's like if you met him, he's just he is a true genius, and I think that was just hard for people to appreciate, hard for people to understand. But it was because he was working on it. That's what really got me interested in it. I wanted to know how to do that.
When did you hop on board with it? I know he was working out to the 80s and the 90s. Did you get on board in like the 2000s?
Yeah, I don't know how it kind of came about, but he and I had developed something of a friendship. He had sort of become a mentor for me as a new assistant professor, and I had some things that I needed to get done and some project I was working on. I was busy getting up to speed, teaching new graduate classes, and then I sort of felt comfortable with things. I think that's when we started talking more about his research. And I think it just, as our friendship grew, I think, and we started to talk more about research, we just kind of thought, why aren't we doing some work together? This could be, we'll put our brains together and see what we come up with here. And I'm really glad I did, because
Yeah, you guys
It's
are
one
really
of
cool
the,
stuff.
yeah, and it's just rewarding too working with him.
Can you talk about some of the different findings from vocal accommodation research? For example, I know you analyzed the 2008 presidential debates. What did you find?
Yeah, that was kind of weird because I mean, what they had sort of found in the past was that when they would analyze um, the voices during presidential debates, they found that really the person whose voice changed the least was the one who came out on top. And it was the person that they were debating that unconsciously changed their voice to match the more constant person that tended to lose. So it was like the person who was, I'm reluctant to use the word relaxed because I'm not necessarily sure that's the right way to think about it. But the person who was just constant throughout the debate really ended up being the one that came out on top, at least in terms of the popular vote. The Obama 2008, that was very, very bizarre because Obama wasn't uh, coming out on top in these debates overall with McCain. And so it was kind of hard to say, well, how exactly did he win then? If he's not doing what happened in the past. In the past, if you just remain, but what he was doing was really interesting, and we ended up calling it a kind of rope-a-dope strategy, referring to Muhammad Ali's boxing style. And what was so interesting about the way Obama debated, at least when you look at vocal accommodation, was he appeared very weak in the beginning of the debate, but then just really developed a strong, constant present toward the end. And so we began to wonder, is that part of his style? Was he just trying to wear down McCain and then just slam it home in the final moments of the debate? So that was kind of an interesting finding. Was this we could predict the outcome from the final portions of the debates, but not if you look at the debate overall. So we wondered whether that strong performance that Obama gave toward the end of those debates is what people were left with. And if that was the thing that they took away. So, I mean, that's still, of course, an open question. Nobody really knows which way the causal arrow goes. Is there something happening in the voice that people are subconsciously picking up on that makes them vote this way or that way? Or is the candidate's confidence simply a reflection of how they're doing in the polls anyway? Or something else that's driving their confidence about how things are going. But yeah, that was kind of a weird set of findings.
In your work with Stan Gregory, you guys also came out with a patent. How did that come about?
Well, we did. We were just testing different aspects of a line of research that grew out of the vocal accommodation research, which was, where are these different signals processed in the brain? So, Stan had noticed had found in his vocal accommodation research that a lot of the action was in the lower frequencies of the voice. So where people were changing or failing to change was in these lower frequencies below 350 hertz. And that led to the question, all right, so if those lower frequencies are carrying socially important information, where in the brain is that processed? Is that processed in the left hemisphere, which is typically where the verbal signal is dealt with, words, the content, the substance of speech, or is it dealt with more in the right hemisphere, which is the more holistic side, creative, emotional? And so we ended up testing that hypothesis by doing something very simple. If you put the low frequencies into the left ear, they go directly to the right brain. If you put the high frequencies in the right ear, they go directly to the left brain. So the hypothesis was that the lower frequencies carry the sort of socio-emotional information, so they should be processed in the right brain. And the higher frequencies carry the verbal content, the words, the meaning, and the left brain should deal with that. So we just gave each part of the brain what we thought it wanted. And that should, if we're right, improve how interactions unfold. People should perceive the interaction to go more smoothly. It should improve task performance, and lo and behold, it did. And in this one particular application that led to the patent, we had people in a driving simulator, and we had them interacting with an assistant who was giving them driving directions around this simulated driving world, while also administering these very difficult cognitive tasks. So we were kind of trying to create the analog of a in-depth cell phone conversation, something that would create a distraction for you. And what we found is that when we use this dichotic listening manipulation, as it's called, where we give the right brain what it wants and we give the left brain what it wants, we actually reduced accidents by 67%.
Wow, that's a lot.
So I know, it was a huge finding. So, and of course we flip-flopped things as well. So we gave the parts of the brain the wrong information. And we actually didn't expect to find this, but that actually improved things slightly as well, relative to the situation where you don't alter the signal at all. But it kind of makes sense, because what happened is the audio signal was pre-sorted. We basically, as we thought of it, performed a sorting task for the brain. So if you can imagine two offices and a big stack of files, and one office needs this half of files and the other office needs this other half of files, you can either give each office the stack that it needs, which is the best situation, or you can give each office the wrong set of files, in which case they just quickly hand them over to each other.
Right.
Or you can walk into one office and dump them all on the floor,
Right.
and then we have to figure out where they go. So in retrospect, it actually made sense that the situation called the confounded condition, where we gave the wrong information to each side of the brain, actually ended up being a little bit better than not doing anything at all, because we had performed this vital sorting task. So that was pretty cool, but we thought, man, if you're reducing accidents by 67%,
Yeah.
we should probably patent that, because that could be really cool if it led to the development of technologies where, we could implement this in aircraft situations or anywhere where people are wearing a dual ear headset, where you can do this dichotic listening method.
Well, that's my next question. Has anybody taken this patent up and been interested in it?
Yeah, we actually are doing another study right now, and because we really don't have anything. I mean, the driving simulator was one thing, but it's hard to sell an idea to anyone on the basis of a single study. And the prototype of the device that we developed was not particularly impressive. And so, but the one thing we both agreed on is we need more research to make sure that this thing works, and to put us in a better position to market this idea if it works out. So we just finished a study where we're going to analyze the data, and I'm very anxious to see if it worked in more of a team context, where you have people working on a team task. So we're very curious to see if it works in that context. Part of the delay is Stan retired not too long after we got the patent, and he took his retirement pretty seriously for a couple of years, and but he's definitely back in the game. So we kind of want to see where this goes once we get a chance to analyze the data. But I'd really like to try to license this technology if this particular study works out.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So in your later work, you focus a lot on processes related to solidarity. What is solidarity, and why are you interested in it?
Well, it's interesting. I got interested in it because of Stan's research. So part of the issue with doing vocal analysis is it requires people to speak. So if you want to analyze, and that's essentially one of the things this vocal analysis technique was great for, was providing you with a sense of how well people are functioning as a team. So one of the interesting things that you see, and we could actually analyze this conversation as well if we wanted to see how things are going, is, you got one person, another person, they both start talking. And then what you find is in the lower frequency ranges, over time, they tend to come together. So the amplitudes of my lower frequencies, you could lay them on top of yours. And after interacting for a few minutes, if things are going well, they'll tend to sit on top of each other. And if they're not going so well, you might even see them move apart. So under the best of circumstances, like if you and I were to say the conversation is going well, or walk away from the conversation feeling like, oh, that went really well, that was really fun, I would bet that you would find a high degree of correspondence between our vocal frequencies in the lower range. Mm-hmm. So, Stan really got me interested in this idea of how do you really measure bonding, social cohesion. And I thought that was pretty cool. And Stan's perspective in general is, how do you really know the performance outputs might give you some sort of key, like if people are really performing well as a team behaviorally, you might want to conclude that they're feeling part of a team, but that's not always the case. And so Stan was always into this idea that the central problem in sociology is the difference between what people do and what people say they do, or what people say they would like to do. So it's kind of, I don't know if you ever watch the television show House, but of course his famous expression is everybody lies. And, Stan was sort of on this mission to get around that problem of not having to rely on people saying, yeah, I feel part of a team, or fill out a paper and pencil measure of cohesion. And so I was intrigued by that. But of course, the problem we ran into is, well, how do you tell if someone's on a team if you don't have them interacting verbally? And that's what got me interested in EEG, because it's actually very similar to voice analysis. I mean, you use, for some of the analyses, you use the same exact procedure, fast Fourier transform. And you can look at brain waves to see how they synchronize, just how in the same way you can look at the complex waveform of the human voice to see how those come together. So it was a natural outgrowth. And I really don't, if I had never met him, if I had never worked on this, I don't think it ever would have occurred to me to do this. Right. But so that's what really got me interested in it was, substantively and methodologically, Stan was interested in cohesion. And I guess if I've made any contribution to that, it's moving into the world of EEG, electroencephalography, to see how people are synchronized even when they're not speaking.
Wow. How did you get interested in EEG? I mean, that's pretty sophisticated, putting the things on people's heads and stuff. How did you learn how to do that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think back and remember what drew me to it. I think it was probably, it's so, you know what? I remember now. It was Condon and Sander. It was, if I recall, it was a footnote in one of the chapters that Stan gave me.
Oh, wow.
And the footnote said, and it was about vocal synchrony, because Condon and Sander had done some stuff on synchronization of movement and synchronization of speech patterns and things. And they had this footnote that basically said, yeah, we had this EEG machine lying around the lab, and I hooked a couple of my assistants up to it, and I had them start interacting. And what I noticed was really cool was over time, and I'll never forget his words, the pens started to dance in harmony. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. It's like, I'm hooked up over here, you're hooked up over here, we're talking, and all of a sudden, the brain waves generated by our brains during conversations start to do the same exact thing. And I thought, wow, if that's a way you could measure social cohesion, that would be really cool, because now I've got a real-time measure of social cohesion without having to ask anybody anything. And EEG is pretty non-invasive, so people can do almost anything while they're wearing it.
Wow.
And so it's funny, yeah, I had to think about that, but it was that footnote in the article or the chapter by William Condon and Sander that got me interested. It's like, well, hey, why don't we start looking at EEG? Then we don't even need to worry anymore if we don't have vocal data.
Is that how you get interested in neuroscience? Is through EEG?
Yeah. Yeah, because it was like, well, if you want to use EEG, you better understand the related insights from neuroscience. I mean, you can't just understand the technology. You've got to understand a lot more.
When did that start taking place, your interest in neuroscience?
I think that was probably around 2011, maybe 2010. Okay. I started getting interested in it, and that's when I approached Shane T and Ed Lawler about doing a project. And because this was their theory, of course, is about relational cohesion. And it's like, well, if we're going to measure relational cohesion, let's try it with EEG. You guys have been measuring it with paper and pencil measures forever. Let's try it out with EEG and see if we can make people's brains synchronize. And so we wrote a grant proposal to get the technology to do the study, and they basically, laughed us out of the room.
Oh, really?
A couple of sociologists asking for tens of thousands of dollars to buy equipment they don't even know how to use.
Right.
And, we had tried to get some collaborators from university hospitals up in Cleveland, but they thought that just some academics trying to partner with medical doctors, it just didn't work. So I was really discouraged. I think we submitted that around 2012, maybe 2013. I can't remember. But I went to the dean, and this is why I love Kent State. I went to the dean, and I said, look, I really believe in this project. I really believe in this lab. And the dean was very supportive and helped us piece together the funds to build the laboratory. And so before I knew it, we had this high density EEG capability. And I'm just sitting here looking at this stuff going, now what? I mean, it's really like somebody handing you the keys to a 747 and say, have fun, and you've never flown a plane before. I mean, that's really what it was, which led to getting a postdoc who actually knew how to use this stuff. But it really was a crash course. So it's like I just got online and started reading anything and everything that I could about EEG, the technology, the methodology, the neuroscience behind it, how it's used in social science, how it's used in medical contexts. And so, so it really was a lot of self-teaching along with working with a postdoc that helped me get a grip on this.
Are you the only sociologist doing this kind of stuff, or there's another, maybe one other person doing it?
Yeah, I mean, Regan Farrat is, she does fMRI. She's at UC Riverside. She's absolutely amazing. She's one of my, I really love the stuff that she's doing. I don't know if she's done any EEG, but I know she's done some fMRI stuff.
Cool.
So she's definitely doing it. I think there's an affect control theorist who's done some EEG stuff. So, but I could definitely, I think, count it on one hand.
Right, yeah.
The number of sociologists. There might be people partnering with people outside of sociology to do this kind of stuff, but it's not very many.
Was there a sociologist? I think his name was Franks. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think he was interested in neuroscience. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, pioneer.
But he never
Absolute
did EEG
pioneer.
stuff.
No, he's theoretical. So, I mean, he pretty much, I don't want to say single-handedly, but I may as well. I mean, he really put neurosociology on the map.
What's his first name? I forgot.
David Franks.
David Franks, yeah.
Yeah, so he's absolutely brilliant guy. And we had him here for a talk several years ago, and he's really a pioneer of neurosociology. But yeah, I don't know that he's done any empirical stuff with EEG. or fMRI, but
It's theoretical.
he's really done a lot for the sub area of neurosociology, put it on the map.
Why do you think
And he makes
sociologists
great
are so?
ginger martinis.
Oh,
He
sorry.
makes
What'd you
great
say?
ginger martinis.
Ginger
He makes great
martinis?
ginger martini.
Sounds
Yeah.
good. Why do you think sociologists are so resistant to neurosocial and biosocial approaches?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm sure John Turner had some insights on that, maybe. But, well, a lot of people have written about it. There's a lot of articles and chapters and books on biophobia, as it's been called. And there's a lot of different reasons for it. I think part of it is just sociology just trying to establish itself.
Mhm.
So, I mean, sociology's been sort of known for that. You know, this is what we do, and sociology's just had a tough time just sort of carving out its own little niche. But I think some of it is just wanting to just establish who you are and what you do, and we don't do that. You know,
Mhm.
we don't just look at individuals. We look at groups. We look at societies. We look at structural things, and we sure as hell don't look at just brains. So I think that's part of it. I think that the other part of it, of course, is, you know, concerns about where that kind of stuff leads.
Right.
You know, social Darwinism. Yeah, eugenics and things like that. I remember when I first proposed to teach a neurosociology class at Kent State. I think this was back in, I don't know, 2013 or something. There was an uprising.
Wow.
People didn't want that course taught. And there was some, they just didn't want a course on brains, or that just, what is all this? What is this about? And so I had to defend it.
Wow.
And it was, there's no ill will over it. I mean, and there were students in that class, excuse me, that specifically took it to challenge it. And I think they ended up liking the class more than anybody else. So, so there's an ignorance aspect to it as well. People not really knowing what it is. Sort of fear of the social Darwinism. And let's face it, I mean, it's it's a totally different animal.
Mhm.
I mean, it was a totally different methodology. You know, having to learn yet something else. You know, learning statistics for a lot of people is hard enough. And now you're going to learn how to analyze and process brain data. That's come on, man. You know, that's I don't need to take that on. So, but yeah, I think there's just a variety of reasons: fear, ignorance. And I don't mean it in like a pejorative way. Just I don't understand. I don't know what that is, and no need to do it. You know, no perceived, like, why do I need to do that?
Right. So what do you think these tools that you're developing in neuroscience can show us about social behavior that more traditional methods can't?
Well, I mean, what I really like about it, my favorite thing about it, is the ability to capture people's states of mind, physiological states in real time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and without having to intervene and stop you and say, hey, you guys feeling part of a team here or what?
Yeah, right.
You can just kind of stand to the side as a casual observer and watch these interactions unfold and keep yourself as far out of the picture as you possibly can as a researcher, and then look at things after the fact, and you can see on paper, you know, looking at the results of the processing of the EEG data, where people really seem to be feeling like they were part of a team. You could see where they were really stressed out. You can see where they were experiencing, say, a lot of cognitive overload, like they were really thinking hard about something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's a continuation of Stan's whole approach to sociology, which was, you know, just how do we know what someone's really thinking? You know, how do we really know? I mean, you could say any number of things to me about how you say you feel, about yourself or someone else. Oh yeah, I love my partner. I really enjoyed working with my partner, when that might not be the case at all.
Right.
Or I'm not biased at all. Of course I'm not biased. But I I guess one way to put it is the brain and the heart don't lie.
Right.
I mean, so if I can really look at how your cardiovascular system is functioning and what your brain is, so some people have some concerns about that. Is that too invasive?
Right.
But I like that aspect of it.
Pretty cool.
To get a sense of what someone's really thinking and feeling in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the Electrophysiological Neuroscience Laboratory of Kent? What kind of research do you do there?
Yeah, well, that started right after we got the grant, the internal grant to buy all the equipment, and realized we didn't know what to do with it. So they had a postdoc competition university-wide, and so I got together with two other faculty members, one from biology, one from psychology. So we really need to get a postdoc because they had some interest in doing EEG work as well. And so we figured if we can get the postdoc, we can really start using this stuff. And we did. So that's when we hired Josh Pollock as a postdoc. And he worked out so well that we ended up hiring him as a research NTT. So as soon as he got here and we got our bearings and we got our equipment all set up, we started what was my desire to kind of march through the formal theories of sociology and see what EEG could do for them. So one of the first projects we looked at had to do with identity verification and non-verification, and what happens when identities are verified or not verified. And so there's kind of this age-old debate in social psychology. You may have heard of the verification versus enhancement debate. What's the fundamental motive? Do we seek verifying feedback of our identities, or do we seek enhancing feedback of our identities? And that's just, it's a thorny issue, and it's proven very difficult to sort out. So we thought we would try to do a study to show how that all works. And so we brought college students into the lab. We provided them with feedback that either verified or failed to verify their student identity. So if they had reported to us that they saw themselves as a hardworking student, if that was a non-verification item, the feedback that they got was in the other direction. So, maybe they put they're very hardworking. We said that they're not very hardworking. So we wanted to see what would happen at a brain level when that happens. And people did not like non-verifying feedback very much, but it was really interesting to watch the process unfold in the brain. So as soon as you get this feedback, the brain immediately goes into action before you're even really consciously aware of the feedback. So, you see this kind of explosion of activity as soon as the brain begins processing this information. And when it's discrepant, it really explodes, particularly in the frontal lobe, where you really start thinking intensely about this kind of feedback. But if it's verifying, not much happens. It's like, yeah, that's... Really? So yeah, it was so cool to me to see, and we did a little video clip of this and put it up on YouTube, but to actually see what's going on in somebody's brain when they're getting this verifying and non-verifying feedback. And so we were able to see at this neurological level how people respond to information about their identities. And we certainly didn't resolve the debate about whether people want verifying or enhancing feedback, but we kind of came down a little bit on the side of, you know what? If somebody says that they're not hardworking and you tell them that they aren't as bothered by that as if it's the other way around. Right. So if the identity information you get is enhancing, that's better than if the identity feedback you get makes you look worse than you think you are. So I think we presented some of the first social neuroscience data within the field of sociology to suggest that it might work this way and not so much the other way.
Really cool.
Yeah, so that was the first project, and then we moved on to, and we're just finishing data analysis for this one. We collected some data on, we finally did that study I was telling you about, where we were testing Lawler's relational cohesion theory. So now we actually have data on dyads where people are engaged in network exchange under structural conditions that facilitate exchange or make it more complicated, that work against it, if you will. And we're actually measuring whether or not their brains synchronize in the situation where the structure of the situation facilitates exchange. Does that congruence between patterns of brain activity, does that actually underlie the self-reported experience of cohesion? So that's what we really want to know, because, of course, the relational cohesion theorists like Ed Lawler and Shane T have been collecting paper and pencil measures of relational cohesion right in the middle of the experiment. That's the way they've traditionally done it. Really? Now we're trying to see, can we get away from that and just measure whether the brain reflects that relational cohesion in certain structural conditions versus others. So that's another one. We've tested expectation states using EEG. So yeah, we're just kind of making our way through the different structural social psychological theories and testing different implications of them and using EEG.
Really cool. Do you have any advice for graduate students who have an interest in social neuroscience?
Yeah, I would say one of the things I didn't have the benefit of doing, because I guess I didn't have this interest, but take courses in it. That's the first thing, because it's not something that's very easy to learn just by Googling it.
Right.
So getting involved in as many courses as possible. The other thing I would say is don't, and this is just the way the field is. I mean, if you're in sociology and you're interested in social neuroscience or neurosociology, I wouldn't necessarily put that up front, because there's not a lot of places that are hiring social neuroscientists and neurosociologists. So you're going to have a hard time finding a job if you're looking for job ads with neurosociology in the title. So, I think it's more something that you can use as a tool to sort of supplement what you're doing. So for me, it's really no accident that I started doing this stuff after I got tenure.
Right.
It's just, it's easier to do this stuff because, I mean, let's face it, there still are some sociologists. I don't know whether I can say a lot, but there are certainly some sociologists, I would bet at least one in every department, if not several, who are not too keen on this kind of stuff. So you might be shooting yourself in the foot. So it's something that I might be inclined to put on the back burner or wait to try to develop it, unless, of course, my hope is this is going to change.
Right. Upswing.
Yeah. I think, we're in the quote unquote century of the brain. And my feeling is that if sociology doesn't get on board with this, sociology's it's going to be left in the dust. I mean, there'll always be a place for us, I think. But if we really want to be involved in some of these exciting discoveries, we've got to understand this stuff too. And we can also be watchdogs too. That's what I always tell the people that are skeptical of it or scared of it, is learn it. I mean, no one's going to listen to you if you don't know what you're talking about. So you can be critical all day long of fMRI, but if you don't know what fMRI is, no one's going to listen to you. So, learn it, read it. And then if you're concerned about how it's going to be used, and everybody should, that's always a concern, I think, in any science with, how are the data we collect going to be used, or, what could happen using our methods this way or that way. But really, no one's going to talk to you if you don't have any expertise. So
Right.
to the people who are skeptical of it, I say there's no better reason for you to learn it.
Yeah.
So you could be influential.
One of your latest articles is about something we're doing right now, having a conversation over video chat. What are some of your findings related to research on video chats?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that, well, the first study that we did on this was we had people interacting just like this. So, it was Skype back when we collected the data. We used Skype to do it. And then that was one condition. And they were doing the lost at sea task or lost on the moon. I can't remember which one. So we had people doing a simple, I don't know, are you familiar with the lost at sea? Okay. Yeah. So, for those who don't know, you've got this list of items and you're supposed to work with your partner to put them in the correct order of importance. Basically, it's just we wanted something to generate discussion, simple little task. And so we had them doing it in a setting just like this. And then in the other condition, we turned the video channel off. So you can't see each other, but you can still hear each other over Skype. So it was a Skype audio call. And then the third condition was face-to-face in one of the rooms in the laboratory. And so we had these 3 experimental conditions, and then we collected the voice data, and we analyzed the voice data, looking for vocal convergence as our measure of cohesion. And what we found was that, as expected, cohesion was highest in the face-to-face condition. And then we expected it to be second highest in the audio-video situation. We expected it to be least in the audio only, like the telephone call. But that's not the way it was. It was face-to-face was the highest, but there was no difference. And this totally threw us for a loop. There was no difference between audio-video and audio only. They generated the same amount of cohesion, and it wasn't nearly as high as the face-to-face. And so we were totally confused about that because that didn't make any sense based on past theory and research. I mean, you get the video channel on, that adds all sorts of information. But then I think we figured out what happened.
What do you think?
People were staring at themselves.
Yeah, I can see that.
So we had a research assistant, we were brainstorming, thinking about this, like, how could this be? Like, how could this have happened? This doesn't make any sense. And he said, you know what? One thing I noticed, and I think I wrote it down in the logbook a couple of times, but I noticed it a lot, was people just stared at themselves the entire time. They weren't looking at their partners. So, he's sitting here watching these interactions take place, and he said people just seem so into their own image or preoccupied with their own image. And so I think that has something to do with it. I mean, yeah. It's
a really interesting finding.
How can you have social cohesion if you're focused on yourself?
Right.
So that was a really cool finding, but so we have to replicate that to see if that is in fact the case.
You did that before COVID took off, right?
Yeah.
That study?
Yeah, that
wow.
was. Yeah, we published that shortly before all that blew up. So it's good timing.
Really?
But yeah, so we're going to be working on another project where we replicate that, but we're also going to do it in virtual reality.
Wow, that's cool.
So we're going to add, we just added a huge wing onto our lab.
You did? Virtual reality? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we've got 2 360-degree treadmills.
Wow.
We've got state-of-the-art 4K research-grade virtual reality goggles with very high-end eye tracking capability.
Yeah.
What
do you plan to use that for?
Well,
do you have any studies lined up with that?
Well, we haven't been able to use it. I mean, we just
right.
built the lab while the pandemic was going, and we haven't been able to get in there and do anything. But yeah, one of the first ones we want to do is a replication of the study I just told you about, this time adding virtual reality. So to see if virtual reality, as we hypothesize, generates a level of cohesion that's as high or close to face-to-face interaction as past research would lead us to expect. And then we can compare that again to the Skype type setting. We'll, of course, add a condition this time where we turn off the participant's own video channel so they can't stare at themselves. Right. So they have to look at their partner, and they can't just look at themselves the whole time to see how they look. So yeah, that'll be one of our inaugural studies, but we've also got some studies planned with looking at performance in threatening situations. So yeah, we've got a whole bunch of little ideas in the works, but it's probably be a while before we get to that. But the inaugural project will be this one where we try to replicate that recent study we published.
Sounds like you're getting more and more high tech, you know? Yeah,
we're definitely, that's absolutely true. More stuff to learn.
Yeah, do you use VR and EEG at the same time?
We can't yet.
No.
As you can imagine, those goggles get in the way.
Right.
But we're working on some hardware accommodations that will allow us to do that. So we can still collect data on heart rate variability, galvanic skin response, and things like that, but we can't use EEG yet, but we definitely want to do that.
It'll be really cool. I mean, at our university, Joseph DuPont, he set up a virtual reality lab as well. We only have 2, but there's no treadmill. Apparently, he said you could do cross-university collaborations in virtual reality.
Yeah, there's some latency issues there, but
True.
We're excited to try it out. I think the treadmills will be cool because now you can, the sky's the limit as to what kinds of worlds you can create because you can move around, you can run around.
Man, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So my last question, you appear to be big into scuba diving. Even seen a video on YouTube where you get into a bathtub with scuba gear on.
Oh, you saw that one?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. What do you like about it, and how often do you scuba dive?
Well, I haven't been very much lately.
No.
Before the pandemic hit, I was doing it a lot. So that was something that my partner Leanne got me into. So she takes her students down to the Bahamas every year. They do a week marine biology trip. And so I think it was back in 2014. She said, "Hey, I really want to learn how to scuba dive. So we can go scuba diving when I go on this marine biology trip. Did you want to do that?" And I said, "Absolutely not. I have no desire to do that."
Oh, okay.
And so she just bought the course anyway. She said, "Well, we're going." I was like, "All right." So I was really nervous. I just didn't like this. I could not wrap my head around this. And I'd say the first class was pretty scary. I mean, it's like there is, and teaching scuba diving now, I think I'm really good at teaching it because I understand the anxiety that some people can have. Even though you have a regulator in your mouth and you're breathing underwater, your brain is telling you that you're underwater.
Right.
And that's just not something that people normally do, is breathe underwater. But yeah, I was a couple of classes and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then we took a trip down to Florida and went scuba diving off the Florida Keys. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I really felt like I had that feeling of what it must be like for someone to step into a new world for the first time. It's a very watered down version of Neil Armstrong, stepping onto the moon. That was the feeling that I had in my stomach. Like I am in an alien world and there's all this stuff swimming up to me and I'm part of that. And so I really got addicted, especially when, because I love animals. We do a lot of animal rescue work and things like that. And what I noticed about a lot of the marine life is they're very curious, and they kind of, especially in freshwater for whatever reason. So I do a lot of freshwater scuba diving, and it doesn't take too long before fish start to school with you and hang out with you. So we go on a trip to northern Wisconsin every year, and I bring my scuba gear along, and I'll swim around in the lakes up there. And you'll look behind you, and there's 3 or 4 largemouth bass just following you around, and 15 or 20 panfish just kind of hanging out underneath you, maybe for safety. But what I thought was such an interesting life lesson about it is, you just have to wonder, are we really more advanced than these things? Because it's amazing how quickly they embrace you and welcome you into their world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a profound feeling to be in this alien world and be embraced by just completely different species, and just to feel a part of that. So I became addicted to it for that reason. And so, like, I haven't been scuba diving very much, but, we try to take at least 1 or 2 trips a year if we can, if we have the time. And then I do a lot of quarry diving in Ohio, which is not that great because it's cold, but it's at least a way for you to keep your skills up.
Cool.
So.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
I'm going to end the recording.